As we prepare to read from the Holy Scriptures and learn from the sacred lessons contained therein, may our hearts and minds be opened. Center us as we again turn to the words passed down from generation to generation for our benefit. Amen. Our reading today comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 21, verses 23 through 32. When he entered the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came to him as he was teaching and said, "By what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority?" Jesus said to them, "I will also ask you one question. If you tell me the answer, I will tell you by what authority I do these things. Did the baptism of John come from heaven, or was it of human origin?" And they argued with one another. "If we say from heaven, he will say to us, 'Why then did you not believe him?' But if we say of human origin, we are afraid of the crowd, for all regard John as a prophet." So they answered Jesus, "We do not know." And he said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things. What do you think? A man had 2 sons. He went to the first and said, 'Son, go work in the vineyard today.' He answered, 'I will not.' But later he changed his mind and went. The father went to the second and said the same. And he answered, 'I go, sir.' But he did not go. Which of the 2 did the will of his father?" They said, "The first." Jesus said to them, "Truly I tell you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are going into the kingdom of God ahead of you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and the prostitutes believed him. And even after you saw it, you did not change your minds and believe him." So there's 2 parts today, and I want to spend a lot more time on the second part, but I don't want to ignore the first part. Jesus is in the temple, teaching and talking to people and preaching. He's got crowds, right, talking to everybody and doing the job. And the actual officials, the people who work in the temple, come up and like, "Hi, who gave you permission to do this?" Right? Because if some random if we're gathering, right, this morning, Sunday morning, and it's almost time to start, and some random person walks into the building and comes up here and starts preaching, I imagine a few people will be like, "Hey, you're not the person we picked to do this. What's the story?" I'm not saying I agree with Jesus' opponents, but I often think we're unnecessarily harsh on them, right? Because they very often are presenting pretty reasonable things. So what authority? Are you selected by God to do this, or did you just kind of take this of your own initiative to show up and talk about this stuff? And Jesus does what Jesus does. Instead of answering questions, he asks them. I love that about Jesus. I know that infuriates people. But Jesus gets asked hundreds of questions, and he answers like 5 of them, and the rest of them he asks more questions in response to. And I very much want to live my life in that way, leaving people with more questions than they came to me with. My children hate it. I'm okay with that. At any rate, Jesus says, "Tell you what, I'll ask a question first, you answer me, and then I'll answer your question." Okay. He doesn't really give them the option, by the way, to agree to this. He just goes into his question, which is, what authority did John have to do his work and baptisms out in the wilderness? Is that from God, or is that his own initiative? And everybody, they stand back for a second, they have their little team huddle, and they're like, "Well, if we say from God, we're in trouble, because we did not put our stamp of approval on his work. And and he was recently-ish executed, so, that's not going to look great. But if we say that it's just his own human origin, he had a lot of followers they were very supportive. If we say that he was, in fact, basically a heretic, we're going to have a riot on our hands. And the Romans who occupy the city, well, they don't take kindly to that. So we can't really answer this question without causing a problem. And on the one hand, it is the way they worded in here, the way they set that up, it feels like a very kind of political response, right? Well, we're going to either offend one group or another, so we can't answer. But I also think there's a very practical level to it that we're not considering, which is, what if they sort of didn't know? Like, how do you decide if God is telling someone else to do something? How do you decide that? Oh, there is a legitimate point to say in this, which is maybe they're sitting back and saying, well, let's see where it goes, right? It's a pretty recent thing. Let's give it a few years. And if it really is successful and it catches on and it goes forward, well, then clearly it's some kind of blessed thing. And if it just disappears, well, then we know it wasn't meant to be. And just like, well, if you're not going to answer, I'm not going to answer. And then he gives them this parable, which sort of answers the question, as the parables usually do, without directly answering it. But it's a little more complicated, and I love it because it responds directly, indirectly, directly to them, but it has a lot of lessons, because this wasn't compiled for the people in the stories, right? By the time this was written, I mean, it's 50 years later. They are making sure that what Jesus is saying is also speaking to the people listening, reading to this. And so this isn't just for a response for the teachers and the scribes and the Pharisees. This is a response for the people in the congregations. He says, let me give you this parable. I have words. I use them. What do you think? A man had the word here, okay, now I'm getting in the nitty-gritty. I got to pull out my Greek here. The word here is not sons. That's huios. The word here is tekna, which means child. It's a gender-neutral word that refers to just a young child. Not like tiny young, but like elementary age child. A man has 2 children. And he goes to the first and said, need you to go out and work in the vineyard. Well, this is a small child, so work is probably, the way children help out. The expectations are not necessarily excessively high here, because we're talking to a small child. But I need you to go out and help out in the vineyard today. And the kid says, I won't. I don't understand how they even get there. It's uthelo, which means I don't want to. I don't feel like it. Okay? And dad goes, and walks over to the second child and says, hey, I need you to go out and help in the vineyard today. Busy day. And the child says, ego. Literally, I am. It's not future tense. It's not I will go. It's I'm going, right? It's like they're already doing it, is the implication in the text. But then Jesus specifies the first one, who said they didn't feel like it. They decided, okay, well, Dad asked, and I better do it. Or maybe whatever, it's not that bad. I don't have anything else going on. And they go and help. But the second kid, the kid who said, I'm already on my way, they never show up. And Jesus asks, which one did the will of the Father? Well, the first, the one that went, they didn't feel like it, but they went, and that's what they were asked to do, right? So there's a job to be done, and who gets the credit for it? Well, the one that actually goes and does it. Whether or not they necessarily feel like it, the one that actually does the work. And I think it's a super important lesson. And this has come up a few times. But it's not enough to just say the right words, right? Right? We don't get away with just saying, yep, I'm already on my way, and then do nothing. There is an expectation from the Father that whatever the kids say, they're going to do it. And that is something that gets real tricky as we look through centuries and centuries of theological development. Because we have far too often, as we've talked about on even Easter, gotten into this rut of cheap grace where, like, we say the words, right? Jesus is Lord, and we're baptized, and then we're good. Except the point of saying Jesus is Lord is that then Jesus gets to ask us to do things, right? It's not very lordly if we can't be asked to do things, right? What is the point of that kind of kingship, of that kind of lordship? So we show up each Sunday, and we say the right words, right? We say the prayers in different places. We say them together. I know I'm putting words in your mouths, but you say them, so that's on you, okay? We say these prayers together. Some of them very ancient, some of them written for each week. We sing these songs, right, that implore us to do things. The song that you guys have done at the end since before I started, I absolutely love this, right? This is a great way to end a service with all of us singing about going out and what? Not being afraid, going in faith. He'll guide us, go in love and show you believe, reach out to others, right? The stuff we're supposed to do, right? Not just words, but it's so easy for us to come in and hear a sermon and sing some songs and pray some prayers that are written down on a sheet or listen to someone else say them and be like, cool, I did my faith stuff for the week, and then come back a week later. This is not accusatory on anyone. This is all of how things often tend to work. But each Sunday, we come here and say, "Ego." Let me get the exact quote here. "Ego Kyrie." I go, Lord. This person's dad is Lord, which is kind of weird, but whatever. Almost like it's meant more for us. But regardless, I go, Lord. I'm doing it. Like, I'm here. I'm saying the words. I believe this stuff, and then we leave. And the expectation that Dad has is that we live this stuff every day, every week. It's really inconvenient to do that. Have you ever noticed that? Wow, is that inconvenient? But that's what God asks. And in the end, when they're like, well, obviously the first one did what they were asked. And God says, right, which is why all the people that are not you, the leaders, the me's, right? This is critical of me. He's talking to the scribes and the leaders and the teachers and stuff. So this is specifically pointing at me, saying you people are going to be at the end. Because these other people out there that aren't worrying about the words, that aren't promising every week to do this stuff, a lot of them are out doing it. They might say, no, I don't feel like it. They might not have the words to say in the beginning, and yet they go out and they work in the vineyard. They produce fruit. They do the stuff that we sing about and pray about doing. Right? Jesus' whole, I come to bring good news to the poor and release to the captives and sight to the blind, people out helping out. And Jesus says they may not have the right words, but they're probably getting in ahead of you if you're saying this and not doing it. It is a humbling thought to remember, I think, for me personally. I won't put these words in your mouths. I do that enough. It is humbling to me to remember that it means nothing if I promise to do the right stuff and never do it. It means everything for someone who has no obligation to do it, no requirement, no promise, either publicly or personally to the divine, to do all these good things, and still does them. We should not be shown up by the people
who aren't promising to live this way and still so often do. We shouldn't. We shouldn't. There's no ifs, ands, or buts or ways around that. We can say, oh, but it says, if we say Jesus is Lord and get baptized, we're saved. Sure, that's the beginning, right? That's your confessional. That's accepting lordship, right? Then it doesn't accept a lot of lordship if that Lord can't tell you to do anything. Then you're just denying it's all over again. In fact, it's probably worse because you said yes and then you refuse, which I think is the point of the kid. This is absolutely a parable of Jesus and the writers of the gospel looking at their congregations and saying, okay, step back for a second. There is a what do I want? What word I choose for this will say a lot about how I think about it. There was a religious conception in early Christianity that kind of split, right? So there's a selection of people and groups within early Christianity that fell into what was called Gnosticism, retroactive. They're called that by their opponents. I don't know if they ever used that term for themselves or not. But you may have heard of this early schism with the Gnostics. Or we find writings sometimes, like the Nag Hammadi library that was found in Egypt, that are referred to as the Gnostic Gospels, if you've ever heard of or read any of those documents. But there's this trend. Christianity exists, but it is not very uniform. They didn't even call themselves Christians. They called themselves the followers of the way. So the people on the way disagree about stuff. What a shock. They disagreed about things too. And a section of them formed into a group we now retroactively call the Gnostics. And the point of Gnosticism was knowledge, right? You are saved. The point of this whole thing is to know certain concepts and to be able to say them properly. And by knowing this secret knowledge and having this thing that only we have, we're going to be saved. We are going to be taken out of this, and good things will happen to us, and screw all those other people. They can go on their way. And the rest of the churches and the leadership got together and like, that doesn't sound like this movement. This doesn't sound like it's just about knowing special things and saying, quite literally, to hell with all of you other people. That's not what this is about. So if you read early Christian leaders, there are so many of them just furious with the Gnostics and tearing their whole ideas to shreds. If you ever read Irenaeus, he is hilarious, by the way, kind of mean, kind of like Paul, who also is kind of mean talking about some of his opponents. But the Gnostics fell into this trap of saying, look, all we got to do is know the right words and have the right ideas and say the right things, and we're good to go, and the rest doesn't really matter. You ever feel like a lot of people never got over that vision of Christianity? Because I sure know a lot of people that never got over that view of Christianity. No matter how clear the early leaders and the traditions over time made it, that's not what it's all about. I grew up Lutheran. I love Martin Luther. The whole huge thing in Lutheran is, right, saved by faith. But even Luther is like, that's not where you stop, okay? Sure, you're saved by faith, but the whole point of salvation is then to drive you into loving your neighbors and doing things. Martin Luther didn't retranslate the Bible, say, cool, I'm saved, and then stop. There are so many stories of his wife, who was a nun originally, but he ended up getting married, getting so angry at him for like selling off every random thing in their house to help people out. Hey, we got a bunch of visitors over, we got to feed them. Well, we don't have enough food. Well, go sell off the silverware. We'll just eat with our hands. That's the point. We, the religious people, the leadership, the ones that have the words to say, right? Ego Kyrie, the ones that say that, this is looking at us saying, it's not enough to just say it, you got to do it. John, The person that started this whole conversation did what God wanted. He did what, hypothetically, Jesus is at least saying, that was from God. He went out. Did he have the proper authority from the scribes and the Pharisees or whatever? No. He did not go to seminary. He was not ordained in a denomination. He didn't have any of that. He went out and said, look, you got to start doing the nice stuff. Read John's stuff from the beginnings of Matthew or Luke, right? You got to give to the people. If you have 2 coats, give one to somebody that doesn't have any. It's life stuff. And Jesus is saying he didn't have any of the right approval. He didn't have any of the right words beyond which everybody knew. He did the right thing. We have to be considerate of those who don't know the right words, don't have the right words, don't say the words that we expect them to say, and do the right thing. We show up, we say we do the work, we need to do it. And if we aren't doing the good in the world that other people out there are doing, then who is obeying the Father? Right words or not? Like Jesus, I'm not going to answer the question. I'm just going to leave it hanging there. You all can think that through on your own.